Jesse Palmer is a college football analyst for the Mothership, and he'll be part of ESPN's live studio coverage surrounding Week 16 action, Sunday's College Football Playoff Selection Day, the College Football Playoff Selection Show, noon Eastern this Sunday on ESPN. Jesse, thanks for taking time out to join us. Let me start with Justin Herbert. How did he go from what he was at Oregon to what he is now with the Chargers?
Yeah, Dan, I mean, I've been really impressed what I've seen from Justin in his rookie season. I think to me, more than anything, it's just been ball location. I think that was my biggest question for Justin Herbert coming out of Oregon, where, you knew he had size and you knew he had tremendous arm talent, but there were times on throws, ball location wasn't exactly precise. And there were times on outbreaking routes on the sideline where he'd miss a guy, maybe leave it a little bit inside. The play might have gotten broken up in college, but you'd watch that and say, well, on Sunday, if you put that a couple inches behind the receiver, that's a pick six. He hasn't had those ball location issues. His accuracy has been spot on. He's hitting guys in the face mask. He's hitting guys in the numbers, and he's doing it while he's able to move around in the pocket. He's been throwing under duress. His deep ball accuracy has been phenomenal. Just so impressed with Justin Herbert because listening to you and a lot of other people as well, it's pretty obvious. Anyone that's watched him, I think he's exceeded the expectations by a long shot this year.
And we got to see Marcus Mariota again last night, and this is the Marcus Mariota we saw at Oregon, and the guy who really put pressure on the defense. But when he was with Tennessee, he seemed very tentative. He didn't want to take advantage of, his weapons, his athleticism. But we did see it last night. What do you like? Is he a backup quarterback, or do you see him as a starting quarterback?
No, I mean, at this point, I think I see him more as a backup and a guy that certainly can come in games and potentially give a spark to an offense. And you're right. I think during his early career in Tennessee, just didn't seem to put it together. He was obviously, in charge of a Chip Kelly offense at Oregon that really capitalized on his athleticism and zone reads and RPOs, and still at a time where that was kind of in the forefront, cutting edge offense at the collegiate level. Obviously, moving to Tennessee, a much more complex offense, and he just never seemed to fully grasp that, and they were never fully able to take advantage of his talents after being the second overall pick. So he's a guy that I certainly see having a very long career, and hopefully for him, he'll get another opportunity down the road. But, at this point, I think it's more likely at least that he's a career backup that gets chances to get in games and play, and certainly still capable of winning a lot of games.
We had Nick Saban on yesterday, and he brought up something interesting about recruiting and how it's changed. And he said, these kids come in and think they're starting right away, and they haven't been told no, or they haven't been criticized. And he said, there's an adjustment there. And you have social media, Jesse, that expects you. You're a 5-star. Hey, what's wrong with you? Like, there's a whole lot that goes into going from high school to college. And if you're playing a high-profile position like quarterback, he said that's been a big challenge for me here. Trying to talk, how do you talk to somebody who hasn't been talked to that way by an old school coach?
I think that's why you're seeing so many transfers now in college football. It seems like a kid shows up on campus, he's not starting right away, and immediately he's out the door, and he's looking for another opportunity. And it's not uncommon now to see guys not just transfer one time, transfer 2, 3, sometimes even more. You're right. There's so much media surrounding these players now. They're committing to their schools on national TV. Sometimes kids are committing, early in high school. Middle school kids now are getting offered, and everybody keeps telling them how great they are. And the reality is they get to a program like in Alabama where you're not just getting the best players in state or in the Southeast, you're getting them from all over the country. Everybody wants to go play for a guy like Nick Saban. And it takes a very tough-minded kid now to come in. A guy like Mac Jones, who, still wanted to go to school there, even though Jalen Hurts was there, even though Tua Tagovailoa was there. There were question marks surrounding Mac Jones heading into this year. He only had 4 starts. They go out and get the number 1 dual threat prospect in the country in Bryce Young. And still Mac Jones has, he just kind of buckles up and says, okay, I got to earn this job. So you're right. It's a totally different mindset today. And it's so much harder today for coaches to have to manage their rosters based on how willing and easy it is for kids now to transfer simply because they're not getting the playing time they expected early.
Should the Heisman Trophy come down to the winner of Alabama, Florida?
I think so. And, I would still give the edge right now to Mac Jones. And it really, for me, goes beyond just being 10-0 and being the number one ranked team in the country. And obviously, Mac's put up fantastic numbers. But Dan, I really think if you've watched the games, if you've watched Mac Jones play week in, week out, he's just playing the position at a different level. It's not just accuracies and avoiding interceptions. It's moving around the pocket. It's his anticipation on throws. He's getting hit right in the chest. He's got guys in his lap, and it's not affecting his efficiency. I'm not saying Mac Jones is the NFL prospect that Trevor Lawrence is by no stretch, but I think you could make the argument Mac Jones has played better this year, and he's played more consistently, certainly on a week in, week out basis. Kyle Trask has completely shouldered not just the Florida Gator offense, but that entire team. And for them to pull the upset against Florida, he's gonna have to have another A+ type performance. But I think those two guys have sort of separated themselves for the rest of the pack.
He's Jesse Palmer, ESPN college football analyst. But Mac Jones could be the Heisman Trophy winner. He's not the best player on his own team.
Yeah, you could make the argument Devontae Smith is. You could make, and there's a bunch of guys on defense that are good too. And they've got a left tackle in Leatherwood that's really good. Najee Harris is leading the nation in rushing yards. That's the reality at Alabama. You probably could have said the same thing for Danny Werfel when he won the Heisman Trophy at Florida. And you probably could say the same thing maybe for Matt Leinart when he won the Heisman Trophy at USC.
Or Gino Torretta.
I don't think he was the best player on his team either.
Dorsey was up for the Heisman Trophy as well. Like, it is strange where Mac Jones might win it, but Devontae Smith, to me, is the best player on that team.
And Devontae Smith might not be the best receiver on that team. Jalen Waddle might be the best receiver.
You think he's better? Do you think he's better?
He only played 4 games. It seemed like he was catching a bubble screen and taking it 90 to the house every game. And the scary part for Bama is they might get him back in the playoff. I don't know. Like, it would be funny to walk in that locker room and really bring a bunch of scouts and say, okay, just look at this clutter and tell me who you think the best is, because it's that in a lot of ways probably explains why they're the number one team.
Mac Jones told me, he said the hardest throw is when the receiver's wide open. As a former quarterback, and Saban agreed. He said yes. And Saban, I think, played 1 year at the position when he went to college. But is that the hard throw? The wide open gun?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's harder for Mac because I feel like it happens a lot. Steve Sarkisian, I mean, as an offensive coordinator, loves dialing up double moves. And I don't think there's another receiving group in the country is good at running them. Devontae Smith catches at least one double move TD a week. Jalen Waddle was doing it before. John Mechie, the Canadian from Brampton, Ontario, outside, he's catching a post for a touchdown every week. So Mac Jones has to deal with it more than a lot of other people. But as a quarterback, when you're back there, you're trying to play fast and you're trying to get your read and take your steps and look downfield and decipher the coverage and try to really quickly get a read on where your receiver is and where his body position is in relation to the closest defender to him. You look down there and you see that he's got him beat by 4 or 5 yards, and you tighten up. You think, oh God, I got to make this perfect. And that's oftentimes when it's tight coverage, that's when, as a quarterback, you can really just let it rip, throw a fastball without overthinking it. And so, for Mac Jones, maybe that makes his season even more impressive. He's made a lot of very tough, wide open throws this year. It's amazing.
All right, let's handicap what's going to happen this weekend. I'll give you just some of my thoughts or some of the information that I've gathered here. If Notre Dame would lose the way Alabama beat Texas A&M, maybe, I'm told by a source with the committee, that they could lose their way out of the Final Four. If Clemson would lose a close game, they probably would still have a hard time staying in, but I don't believe that because they love those shiny objects. They want to have Trevor Lawrence in there. And Florida, if Florida beats Alabama we know is still staying in, can Florida get in? So wherever you want to go with that, whatever topic you want to dive into, if you have something to the contrary.
Yeah. So I would say Bama's a lock to be in. I think with Florida losing to LSU last week and North Carolina smashing Miami, I now think Notre Dame's in. I kind of thought like you last week. I thought, well, if Notre Dame goes out and they get blown out by Clemson, there's a possibility that they could get left out. You got to remember in 2017, Georgia got beat by Auburn by, I think it was 23 points. they still got in as a one-loss team. I think with Notre Dame's resume, UNC is a team the committee really likes. They certainly looked great against Miami last week, and they've beaten Clemson already. I think you could take a one-loss Notre Dame resume and put it up against a 6-0 Ohio State, or even an 8-1 Texas A&M, whose best win would be the Gators, who, by the way, after this weekend might be a 3-loss team. Clemson, if they lose, the Notre Dame Clemson game to me is really the interesting story in this, because if Notre Dame wins, Clemson loses, you've got a 2-loss Clemson that's lost twice to the number 2 team in the country. What does that look like against, say, an 8-1 Texas A&M? Clemson's resume, if they lose, wouldn't necessarily be great. Not just being a 2-loss team, and we've never seen a 2-loss team get in. Their best win is 18 Miami. There's only 2 teams on Clemson's schedule, Pittsburgh and Boston College, who currently have winning records outside of Miami. So it's not as strong as you potentially like. I do agree. I think people think that with Trevor Lawrence on the field, people expect them to win that game. If Notre Dame loses this weekend, do they fall from 2 to 3? And then does the committee rematch Clemson and Notre Dame for a third time? Is that something that the committee would talk about? Do we really want to see this again? What if it's a close game? And you say, well, Notre Dame won the first in double OT, Clemson won the second. Yeah, let's let them do it again. Or would they move Notre Dame down purposely to 4 and maybe Ohio State up to avoid that rematch? There's another possibility. I mean, Texas A&M, if Notre Dame wins, could slide into number 4. And now you've got that Bama Texas A&M rematch. And you mentioned they got beat by 28 points the first time. So there are rematch scenarios very alive this weekend. Be interesting to see how the committee decides to play that. They're not supposed to factor that into their discussion with respect to who's number 1, 2, 3, and 4. But it seems like it's common sense and it's human instinct just to have to at least factor that in and consider it.
Yeah, I said it's a TV show, and I get criticized, but you know, they want the 4 best schools. They want the biggest fan bases. They want eyeballs on this. A&M, if A&M had Johnny Manziel, Jesse, we would be talking about them in a different way. We don't know Texas A&M. We know their coach, and that's it. They have a quality team. We all know that. Iowa State has more shiny objects than A&M does, I think, as far as talent goes, skill position guys. USC, if USC had been in the conversation the last couple of years, we would look at them differently this year. So I just don't know what the process is that's a fair process. And maybe I'm being naive. Every other sport, they want parity. You know, the NFL wants parity. They want to help you if you're bad. The next year, they give you an easier schedule. Baseball, like they will give you the number 1 pick. College football doesn't want parity here. So as we move down the road here, next 5 years, like what does college football look like if it looks any different than it does now?
You know, it's you know, we kind of, you know, go into every year and we sort of have our expectation level, and you know, and this year was no different, even with the pandemic and shortened season for some conferences. I think people still expect Bama, they still expect Clemson, they still expect Ohio State, and then it's kind of like, hey, who else? Yeah. Who else is going to get in? With the way recruiting is going today, it's like the rich keep getting richer, and you got to give those schools credit. I mean, there's not a lot of drop off at quarterback. I think that's been one of the big factors this year for a lot of these programs and their continued success. You know, the Texas A&M thing I think is interesting because the committee's respected them the entire time. And I think that win against the Gators has stood out in the committee's mind. They've been sitting there at number 5, I think, every college football playoff ranking. They're right there. They need help. They need Notre Dame to win. They need Alabama to win so they can say their worst loss was against the number 1 ranked team. But you're right. I mean, you know, maybe not the headliners. Kellen Mond's very quietly had a very good year. He's been inconsistent throughout his career. 18 TDs this season, only 2 picks. They run the ball. I'd argue this is the best Jimbo Fisher's called plays on offense at any point in his collegiate career, even better than when he was at Florida State, simply because they had their best receiver opt out at the start of the year. They had another key receiver get hurt in that game against Florida, and he's had to kind of scheme guys open. They're a dominant defense. They're a really good team. If Texas A&M gets in because Clemson loses, I don't have a problem with it. But, you know, I think that Notre Dame Clemson game, the ACC title game, I think will go a long way in kind of determining, you know, the order of what we see 1 through 4.
Ohio State just win and you're in? Like it doesn't matter if it's by 1 or by, 25?
I hesitate to say by 1. I think they need to go out and dominate. And listen, if they do that, then I think they're absolutely in at 6-0. They've been a dominant team that's been in control of their games this year. Even in the close loss against Indiana, they were winning that game 35-7 until it started getting weird. And Justin Fields had his worst game throwing the ball, throwing 3 picks in that game. But, the committee loves Indiana. They love Northwestern. From a resume standpoint, those would be good wins for Ohio State. And, there's a lot of detractors saying, well, you only played 6 games. If the committee felt like Ohio State was quote unquote comparable, maybe to a 2-loss Clemson or a 1-loss Texas A&M, then maybe you take the amount of games played as a tiebreaker. Ohio State would have the Big Ten championship, which the committee is supposed to use as a tiebreaker. A 2-loss Clemson and Texas A&M wouldn't have that. So that would be an interesting discussion as well. But I think if you're Ryan Day and Ohio State, I think if you win that game convincingly like they're expected to, then I think Ohio State's in the playoff.
Thank you, Jesse. Appreciate your time. Happy holidays, and we'll be watching coming up this weekend.
You got it, man. Thanks for having me, buddy.
That's Jesse Palmer, ESPN college football analyst, and they'll recap this weekend's action, the college football playoff selection day. College football, the selection show will be noon Eastern this Sunday on ESPN.